Welcome to Horror History, where we dive deep into the chilling and bizarre events that have shaped the darker corners of history. I'm your host, Vigilante, and in today's first episode, we'll explore one of the most mysterious and unsettling unsolved murders in history. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, a tale of terror, isolation, and unanswered questions, all set in the eerie Bavarian countryside. So, grab a seat and let's dive into the mystery. Let's set the scene. The year is 1922, and in a remote area of Bavaria, Germany, sits the Hinterkaifeck farm. This wasn't a bustling town or a place where neighbors came together frequently. It was a lonely, isolated piece of land, surrounded by dense forests. The Gruber family, Andreas, his wife, their daughter, her 2 children, and their maid, were the sole residents of this farm, which was tucked far away from the nearest village of Gruber. But there was something off about this farm. In the months leading up to the murders, the family began to notice strange occurrences. Andreas Gruber, the head of the household, noticed something unsettling one winter day. He found strange footprints in the snow that led up from the forest all the way to the house, but none leading back into the woods. This perplexing discovery would be the first of many signs that something was terribly wrong. Not long after, Andreas also heard strange noises in the attic, scratching, scurrying sounds that seemed unexplainable. He even mentioned these noises to his neighbors, but no one could figure out the cause. It's important to remember that this farm was far from the village, so the possibility of someone coming in and out without being noticed was virtually non-existent. But the family didn't feel the urgency that they should have, dismissing these occurrences as the product of a wandering animal, or perhaps the creaking of the old farmhouse. As these events piled up, the family's unease grew. Still, no one could predict the horrors that were to come. The story of the Hinterkaifeck murders would soon enter the annals of crime history, a case that would not only puzzle investigators, but captivate anyone who dares to examine it. March 31st, 1922. The night that would change everything. The Gruber family, along with their maid Maria, would be slaughtered in their own home. The first victim was Andreas Gruber, who was found in the barn, brutally struck with an axe. His body was left sprawled out in the hay, covered in blood, but the killer didn't stop there. Inside the farmhouse, the remaining family members were methodically murdered. Andrea's wife was found dead in the house. Their daughter and her 2 young children were also slain with the same viciousness. Lastly, Maria Baumgartner, the maid, was killed. But here's the chilling detail: the killer didn't flee the scene immediately. The murderer seemed to have stayed inside the house for some time, possibly even for days after the murders. It's reported that the killers went so far as to clean the bloody axe, feed the family's animals, and even make use of the household resources. The family dog was found tied outside, unharmed. This detail has baffled investigators, as it suggests the killers had no intention of rushing away from the scene. One particular eerie aspect of this case is the timeline. The bodies weren't discovered until several days after the killings, and during that time, it's reported that strange sounds continued to emanate from the farm. Some say the sounds were faint cries or knocks. Others claim they were simply unnerving noises in the wind. But in the dead of night, these strange sounds seemed to echo across the empty property, and no one knew who or what was responsible. Once the bodies were discovered, the police investigation began. But this case was unlike any other. There was little evidence to go on, no witnesses, no obvious suspects, and no obvious motive. What made it even more disturbing was that the crime had been so meticulously carried out. There were no signs of struggle from the family, indicating that the killer might have been familiar with them. Investigators found that the bodies had been disturbed in a strange way. While the family's bodies were hidden away, the animals had been tended to, food had been consumed, and the house had been cleaned. The killer had no intention of making a quick getaway. They were biding their time. Adding to the confusion were the mysterious footprints in the snow. They had been traced back to the house from the forest, but no footprints were found leaving the scene. The murderer had somehow vanished, or perhaps they had never left. Despite intense efforts, the police couldn't find enough evidence to identify the killer. There were suspects, neighbors, workers, and even family members, but no conclusive proof. One suspect was a man named Lorenz Schlitzenbauer, who had been a former lover of Victoria and was the father of one of her children. He had a strained relationship with the Gruber family, and some people thought he might have had a motive. But despite his presence on the farm, during the investigation, there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Another theory was that the killer might have been someone from the surrounding village, perhaps someone who had a personal grudge against the family, or even a stranger who had been hiding on the farm for days. One of the most puzzling aspects of the investigation was the strange behavior of the family's surviving dog. It had been locked outside, and while it was unharmed, some speculate that it may have been guarding the killer, who could have been hiding inside the house. Was the killer someone who knew the family well, someone they trusted, or could the killer have been a complete stranger? Over the years, many theories have emerged about who could have committed such a brutal crime, and each one seems to open more questions than answers. Let's explore some of the most popular theories. One theory is that the killer was a member of the Gruber family themselves, or someone closely connected to them. Could it have been a family member seeking revenge or dealing with some hidden grudge? Some experts have speculated that Andrea's son-in-law, Lorenz Schlitzenbauer, could have been involved. He had a tense relationship with the family, and some people believed he might have been motivated by anger over his ex-wife's relationship with her father. But this theory doesn't hold up under close scrutiny, as Schlitzenbauer was eventually cleared of any involvement. Another theory is that the killer was a stranger, a passerby, or someone with a personal vendetta against the family. Given the isolation of the farm, it's possible that the killer could have stalked the family for days before the murders. But if they were a stranger, how did they know so much about the family's daily routines? The killer seemed too familiar with the house's layout and the family's patterns of behavior. And then, there's a supernatural theory, one that many people still believe to this day. The Hinterkaifeck murders are often associated with ghost stories and tales of curses. Some believe that the farm was haunted or that the murders were the result of some paranormal force. These theories are far less likely than more practical explanations. Could the family have been victims of a curse? Or were these events the result of a more earthly malevolence? Finally, some believe the killer could have been hiding on the property for days before the murders took place. Evidence suggests the killer had time to clean up, feed the animals, and even make use of the house, as if they were familiar with it. Was the killer someone who had been lurking in the shadows for weeks, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike? The Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most infamous unsolved mysteries. Despite an intense investigation, no one was ever convicted, and the case has become a symbol of both fascination and horror. The farm was abandoned, and the Gruber family's deaths remain unsolved. Theories continue to circulate, but the truth may never be known. One of the most unsettling aspects of this case is the unanswered questions. Why were the family murdered in such a brutal, personal way? How could the killer have stayed on the property for so long without being caught? Was the killer known to the family, or was it someone who had never been seen before? Whether the truth may be, the Hinterkaifeck murders continue to haunt those who investigate them, and as we look back on this chilling case, we're left with a sense of unease, knowing that there are still pieces of this puzzle that have never been put together. That's it for today's episode of Horror History. If you're as fascinated by this case as I am, make sure to subscribe for more chilling stories from the past. The Hinterkaifeck murders may have left behind more questions than answers, but it's a story we can never forget. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and as always, stay safe.